Tom made a response to Pyro, so you all know what I have to do. Seeing as I made a response to Pyro and Tom has made a response I have a similar opinion on. I recommend watching Pyro's, Tom's, and my video before continuing. Side note, I will be including more footage in the video here so people can't claim I'm taking things out of context, which is something you could have said about my last video, but I disagree with you on that. Know that most of the things I leave out are me agreeing with Tom on a certain point. Most being that sometimes I will include it as I have something to say about the point that I agree on. I'm trying very hard that my words aren't twisted here, because if these videos get loads of dislikes because I'm not completely siding with Pyro, many will do so in the comment section of the video. Here we go again. Making this video felt very similar to my last on Pyrocynical, as my opinion on this response was very similar. He made some good points, cleared his name a bit, debunked bad points, made some bad points of his own, stuck by some bad takes I still disagree with, and overall brought up things about the opposing side that puts them in a questionable position. Difference is, one is being heralded as an amazing response, while the other one gets buried, and the person who made it likely will be exiled, mocked, and shamed for the rest of their YouTube career. Today I aim to cut past the biased garbage and honestly critique both parties involved and the larger commentary community for their handling of this situation.
A widely beloved and respected creator, and people want to see him come out from this on top. My first issue with Pyro's response comes down to framing and misrepresentation, which he ironically accuses me of in the video. He opens it up by talking about the accusations of grooming and being some sort of predator, and then makes the rest of the video about my document and videos made about my document, as if I was accusing him of either of these things.
Recently, to those who are unaware, I've been accused of grooming a 15-year-old boy when I was 19. That I'm some kind of predator and was aware of his age all along. This is categorically untrue and a complete lie. The supposed proof for these insane allegations is paper thin and embarrassingly wrong.
He says that the allegations are insane, as if they're so ridiculous to the point that any of it could possibly be true. However, as time goes on, he has to make multiple concessions and admit to most of it. This is a misrepresentation of my videos and my intentions. He's moving the goalposts. It's an attempt to shift the focus of the video on disproving those allegations and conflating them with what I actually said. By responding to my points in tandem with points that I never even made, and not even clarifying who made the argument, he makes it seem as if these are all from me, but they're just not. In my original video, I flat out said that there was no evidence of grooming and that he's not a pedophile. She even pointed to his age being younger than 15 and said that while the age gap was bad, she doesn't think that it constitutes grooming. And I agree completely. It may not constitute grooming. And in the follow-up document I released about it, I made the claim that I didn't really know either way, leaving it up for the readers to decide. Is Pyrocynical a groomer? While I first stated no, after these new leaks, I don't feel comfortable saying no. That being said, Ivory's basic message can be legitimately proven to be true. When he was 19 years old, Pyrocynical messaged a 15-year-old sexually. Pyro frames this as a disingenuous move on my part.
This document is cowardly. I mean, like, the ending is no exception. Like, they don't even definitively state if I groomed anyone. They just leave enough room for people to draw that conclusion themselves without openly saying.
But in reality, this was me doing my best to put all of the information on the table and allow some room for interpretation for what people think. I intentionally didn't make a judgment call, and I tried to make more non-definitive statements in the document as more information was and still is coming out. I wanted anyone to be able to draw their conclusions about the topic. This is not malicious or cowardly in any way, as Pyrocynical claims.
Okay, Tom opens up with the statement that Pyro misrepresented and framed the video here, which is the point I made in my video, and I feel barely anyone has made against Pyro, so at the very least, I'm glad I was able to point that out before anyone else.
Claim, but you leave so much out of my original statement. It's written with like such cruel intentions, and it waits until page 16 out of 19. Only then to confirm that I never actually sent or received nudes.
While this is the case, this wasn't a malicious move, and this isn't really a point I even had to acknowledge because the original accusations had nothing to do with sending naked pictures of himself to anyone. He claims that I hid this detail in the middle of a paragraph, but it's right there. I can't hide the words, you just have to read it.
It also tries.
Although this is a weak point, I don't think he meant the statement of nudes not being sent when referring to leaving loads out. He meant the Twitter thing, which he had you genuinely cornered for, but this point is still mute, as so much came down to just one point, instead of multiple, as that phrasing implies.
To twist conversations like this one. You know, like claiming that this isn't part of the roleplay, but discussing the hypothetical of having sex with Ivory. No context, no conversation before, no conversation after. You're just meant to interpret this as 100% I wanted to have sex with him in person.
And as for the idea that I twisted it from roleplay into actual conversations about sex, well, that's exactly what it was. You're telling this guy that you're going to eat his cock up with your ass, and at the same time claiming that this has absolutely no basis in reality. Which is ridiculous, because that's exactly what you're fantasizing about doing. Roleplay itself is literally fantasizing about having sex and sexual interactions. I don't know how he would even try to make this point. You could make the argument that you're just imagining your personas having sex, but this doesn't line up with the actual DMs between Ivory and Pyro, where he says stuff like, "I bet your cock is so hard from imagining that," and "I bet that turns you on." This even lines up with the messages between Ivory and Ida, so the idea that this is all just nothing doesn't really make sense to me.
But it isn't a hypothetical of sex. If that is true, then that means he'd want to have sex with everyone he talked to. And as Pyro admitted, he did this with random people he knew nothing about.
Let's elaborate a bit. Fetish mining is a technique used by people with unconventional fetishes to either normalize or rope participants into their gratification. For example, if someone had a foot fetish and asked people for photos of their feet for innocuous reasons. This, by definition, is what Pyro was doing in his defense, as we even see in prior allegations. He would first initiate a conversation joking about the fetish, and if they showed interest, he'd then escalate it. He'd get them to either draw art of his fetish, or if they were engaged enough, roleplay with him. And just like in the foot fetish example, there's nothing inherently sexual about the photographs, or in this case, the personas, but the exploitative part is that he's jerking off to it. And he downplays it so heavily by calling it furry stuff and cringe shit, while in other parts of the video, he admits it's what he jerks off to almost comedically.
The cringer furry stuff with someone else.
This is just porn for him. This is what he gets off to, so framing it like it's not a big deal is incorrect. You say you never saw Ivory sexually, but you're masturbating to the idea of, once again, eating his cock up with your ass and talking about his dick. How on earth is this an adequate explanation? Pyro's strongest point from the video.
But it was consensual, except for Ivory. Although there are some other instances where it would not have been, I do not believe the evidence provided for those instances, aside from Ivory's, is weak. It should not matter whether or not he is doing it, as long as it's with legal, consenting adults. It still does not mean he wanted physical sex. Which, yes, still doesn't excuse it like he thinks it does in his response, but you're implying that he wanted physical sex when all signs point to the fact that he did not. Although that doesn't excuse him for sending things that were undeniably sexual to a minor.
And I'm not sure why it's being used as proof that I knew he was 15, because if you compare the dates, this message was sent 2 months after he sent me his link with his age in bio.
And I would concede on this point if Pyro had stopped talking to Ivory once he learned of the age gap, which he didn't, and Pyro admits this in the video.
In retrospect, I never should have continued the furry stuff with him once I learnt of his age.
Yes, he did talk to a 16-year-old sexually, and at that point he did know about it. But in this video,
Lying. Not to mention, the age of consent in the state where Heather resided, being Washington, is 16 years old, so it would have been completely legal for them to meet up and have sex. The general rule of thumb in these situations should be that if you can't get the guy arrested for it, then don't try to destroy his life over it. Now, is that age gap acceptable? That's up to you to decide. I personally would say that it is not okay, and parents should probably have been involved there to stop this girl from flaunting herself online to men who are a little too old for her. I also think that he probably deserves to be criticized for speaking to this girl whilst knowing that she was 16 years of age. But is it irredeemable? I would say no. When reaching out to Elvis the Alien for comment, he had this
you claim it's forgivable, which I believe to be here as well. 16 is far more forgivable than 15.
Firstly, once again, as a clarification, Pyro's messages here are deleted. And as for the idea that he was deleting his messages because the content of them was furry fetish stuff, this doesn't really seem to line up either. The idea of Pyro being a furry freak has been a joke in the community for a while. He even held his own phone up to his camera to show his fat thing in the background. His own girlfriend, who he is public about dating, draws this shit regularly and has been doing so for years. It wasn't hard to put the pieces together, man. This doesn't really add up. Ivory asks Pyro when he can visit him on May 6, 2017.
That's all the furry thing was. Jokes, after Keemstar accused him of being one, which we'll get into later. Also, very little knew or cared enough to check out his girlfriend's social media where it was open about furry stuff. The general, unassuming audience still didn't know he was a furry until this went down. That was what Pyro was scared of, at least that's what I believe. I'm not inclined to believe he lied without further proof.
Pyro when he can visit him on May 6, 2017. The last reference in text to sexual roleplay prior to this was April 20. 29th. Pyro claims that he invited Ivory to the event indiscriminately, but reading the messages, we can see that this isn't possible because Ivory initiated the conversation. It would contextually make no sense. The actual messages indicate they were looking for any chance to meet up, and the event simply happened to be a convenient time to do it. I can already hear people blaming Ivory for initiating this conversation, but again, Pyro was the adult here, and because all of Pyro's messages were deleted, we're only able to speculate as to why it was brought up.
I never thought in my life I'd have to ever justify something like this, but I do remember back in 2017, Niall invited me and a bunch of other people to drink with him. And I remember telling Niall very last minute that I couldn't come, so I pretty much flaked on him. To say something sexual was going to happen in a very public event with a load of people, even people Niall didn't even know and wasn't really close with, it's just false. Seriously. There's just no question about that.
Sive Morton is then brought in to downplay this, stating that it was a public event and a lot of people who Pyro didn't know were invited as well. This is all irrelevant. Do you think Ivory would have just flown home after a night of underage drinking? And do you think that nothing sexual happens after public events? This doesn't refute anything that I said. This could only refute a definitive statement claiming that they met up for sex, which some people did do, and I don't support. And what was Sive trying to imply when including the people he wasn't close with would be there? You were frequently messaging this person over Discord about your fetishes, talking about your kinks with them and what you're interested in, to the point where Ivory was comfortable disclosing his sex life to you. Even though it's framed as a refute, nothing Sive said changes anything. Does this mean Pyro had plans for something to happen? Not necessarily, but it's not off the table.
I don't think it matters in what circumstance Pyro invited him. He tries to justify that his and a few others take that this was for sex, which I can't defend. It's a genuinely terrible point, dude. I also assume they wouldn't allow Ivory to underage drink, but we'd need Ivory's testimony on that.
Side note unrelated to this doc, I've actually seen screenshots circulating around of someone who drew like fan art of my Fox character back in 2016. I then apparently replied to them like jokingly saying not thick enough and then asking for their age, and they said 15. So when people saw this, they instantly drew parallels to the grooming allegation. I asked them for a thick version and they drew this, which isn't even really that different from previous things they drew before even getting into contact with me. I didn't commission it. What was drawn wasn't pornographic. They'd drawn very similar stuff before, and there was no roleplay here, it was nothing. And the thing is, this wasn't even a call-out post. The person that made the original video just said it was funny.
Pyro also points to an instance where his character was being drawn by someone who he knew was 15 years old, after he asked them to, which I brought up here in a tweet. He claims that there was nothing pornographic about the drawing, and while on a technicality he may be right, if we zoom in on the image that he shows in the video, we can see his Fox character wearing underwear with a bulge, as well as turned around with its ass drawn in detail. If this isn't not safe for work, I don't know what is. Pyro claims that he was responding that it should be thicker as a joke, but in the DMs between Ivory and him, he would often say could be thicker in regards to situations like this, which he admits to getting off to. So it's not a leap in logic at all to say that this is the kind of stuff that would satisfy him sexually. It literally is, by his own admission. Once again, that defense is characteristic of fetish mining. And as for the person making the accusation claiming that they weren't particularly hurt by it, that doesn't really change the fact that this is evidence of Pyro being open enough about this to ask someone, who he knew was 15 years old, to draw it for him. It's just
Although I disagree with Pyro for calling it not pornographic, I don't think it was a commission or something. I mean, thick was a huge meme in his fan base at the time, and the girl making it so over-sexualized was of her own accord. Pyro never said in those DMs for it actually to be hot, just quote-unquote, thicker please, which is obviously a joke by the capitalized letters.
Was finally admit that he fucked up in a way that felt at least a little bit sincere.
Now, I do want to directly say something to Ivory and apologize to him and to anyone else that I did the furry roleplay garbage with. What seemed consensual and reciprocal may very well not have been.
But a lot of that is negated by him continuing to twist things, especially my own words, and this situation to bend to a scenario where he is a victim. A few weeks ago, he was spreading bullshit about Ivory, and now he feels bad all of a sudden. The accusation of Pyrocynical being a pedo or a groomer has been dropped for weeks by most people, and I have rarely seen anyone of importance saying this. A few people may assert it or imply it, and I want to take control of this right now and say that I don't support anyone calling him a pedo, because there's no adequate evidence to say that. And claiming that I have made false allegations against Pyrocynical is simply untrue. My document points to a body of circle.
He states in a video he was panicking at the time. I mean, who wouldn't with allegations like these? I certainly have in the past. And he built this narrative in his head that Ivory was out to get him, and he was looking for evidence, no matter how flimsy, to convince himself of that, to cope if he will. This seems like a very natural response, and if he lied about this, then I guess Pyro knows a lot about psychology. I just see it as unlikely likely is he did lie.
I'll apologize for my comparison to red kiwis from my original document. That wasn't a fair comparison to make. I had some friends of mine reach out to me about that at the time that I released the document, and you know what? That's completely fair. These two situations are not worth putting side by side, and it wasn't right of me to do so. Additionally, Pyro's point about him being suspended on Twitter was fair, and it made a few of the points in my documents.
I do believe there are a bit more concessions you have to make, especially on some of the points I critiqued on this video that were poorly substantiated or flat out nonsensical that you still backed up. But it begs the question why you said these in your original Google document in the first place. We still haven't got an adequate explanation as to why you thought these made sense. It just seemed like you acted really dumb or thought you can get away with one or two bad points as the rest of your document was stellar enough, or you were in a rush to make it, which I think is the most likely option, but I'd struggle to think of why you'd be in a rush about it. Maybe something personal.
The amount of deceptive, fabricated bullshit to leave his greasy lips is absolutely astounding. Firstly, let me give you an example of how Keemstar is a liar by trying to expose me as some kind of furry.
Now, let's take a step back in time. In 2016, Keemstar rather notoriously accused Pyro of having a relationship with a 15, 14, 13-year-old French girl.
Pyro was trying to hook up with a 13-year-old girl from France, all right? That he was technically like a pedo or a weirdo or something, right?
And as you may recall, Pyro succinctly debunked these allegations. He highlighted how Keem couldn't seem to keep her age consistent, and traced it back to 3 anonymous individuals who he claims admitted themselves to not know what they're talking about in this video.
And if that wasn't bad enough, Keem is now trying to spread even more bullshit, saying that I'm dating underage girls and saying outright on stream that I'm a pedophile.
Public perception of these events is that the entire story was fabricated by Keem as some sort of petty revenge for a YouTube conflict. Apart from the fact that multiple aspects of this callout later turned out to be flagrantly false, like Keem supposedly leaking Pyro's face despite it being in multiple public videos already, few know the actual evidence towards the French girl allegations. On June 11th, 2016, 2 days after Pyro's video, Keemstar tweeted out screenshots from the French girl in question in which Pyro plainly stated that they had a relationship and that he was happy to wait for her to turn 16. This implied that there was far more merit to the allegations than first believed. But how would we know that this screenshot is real? Well, Pyrocynical himself confirmed that they were when released. On his subreddit, he wrote a long response to the leak, where instead of denying their validity, he tries to explain away each message point by point. He claims that the relationship was just a friendly relationship, and that he only said relationship once in the screenshot. However, he then states that he was happy to wait for her to hit 16, meaning nothing sexual transpired, and he was happy to wait for her to reach the age of consent if they were to ever have a proper relationship. So they never had a relationship, but he was waiting for her to reach the age of consent just in case, and then admitted in later edits that he didn't even know what the age of consent was in her country, something that he seemed so ardent about in his current video. Pyro then reveals he'd since contacted the girl to ask if she'd sent the screenshot, to which she denied and believed to have been hacked. I'm not going to speak to the circumstances surrounding these allegations because I know there are people behind the scenes who are involved in reopening their files on top of files, but I wanted to bring it up to highlight just how much it mirrors the current allegations. Pyro manipulated the situation to make it appear baseless. He made it seem as if Keem had entirely fabricated the story, not acknowledging in his video that the girl did in fact exist. Once Keem produced evidence and he couldn't deny the relationship anymore, he tried to discredit the message through attacking the leakers, implying that they had hacked her account and that they simply had a vendetta. Pyro's fan response was similar, assuming the messages were fake because the dates were written in European format. You know, something you'd expect if one of the parties lived in Europe. And to this day, even those closest to him think that these messages are fake in spite of him never flat out denying it and admitting to them being real. Pyro has a pattern of behavior in which he rides off the benefit of the doubt. He will fabricate the best excuse he can based on the known evidence, then adjust it when more information comes out. At first, it was Keemstar lied. It's all made up, and Pyro doesn't even mention whether or not the girl exists. He simply calls Keemstar a slanderer and says he's looking into legal action, which, of course, never happened. He turns the situation into a meme by making jokes about it and making fun of Keemstar, as he did in the present day by having Colossal read his DMs and laugh at them. It makes it all seem a lot less serious. Then, all of a sudden, once Keemstar produces the screenshot, now he runs back to his Reddit to respond, where very few of his fans will actually see, and he'll be less pressed on the subject. Now, the French girl exists, and he has to produce these fantastical explanations for the entire situation. The exact same thing he did today. I'll even link this Reddit post in the description if you'd like to check it out. At what point—
While this case is worth taking another look at, it must be treated carefully, and also take anything coming from the rat's greasy lips with massive trucks of salt, please.
Reddit post in the description if you'd like to check it out. At what point will we admit that the hard truth is just that, the truth? For most Pyro fans, probably Probably never. And why are people so accepting of Pyrocynical's response? Because they want to be. His own subreddit has been spreading.
I think that sums it up the best. Especially the extremely hostile responses to Tom. When it's Pyro's response, open ears. Tom's, dislike and leave immediately. Shame and shun him. Do not listen to him. He speaks ill will of the mighty Pyrocynical. While Tom isn't entirely right, he doesn't deserve to be silenced. He deserves deep and severe critique, not a scorched earth policy. I mean, the response has been out for 5 hours, and already 2k more likes than dislikes, which is absolutely disgusting behavior in my opinion. Silencing Tom because he speaks ill will of someone you like.
His original response on Reddit was full of victim blaming and twisting the truth without really taking responsibility for what happened, which I stand by, and that's why so many people went on to pick it apart. If he was so happy to victim blame the first time, why am I supposed to believe that all of a sudden this current apology is sincere and he feels so bad? The original conclusion that I reached in my second video was not that Pyrocynical was a groomer or a pedophile, but that he was so depraved that he was willing to talk to basically anyone in a sexual manner, regardless of age. Here, Pyro is clearly afraid that some of
It is a possibility that needs to be opened up. Not one I really believe in yet, but we can't disregard it.
the ability of him using his platform that way. This is enough for me to say that Pyro is deplorable. As for the accusation that I'm just biased, which isn't something Pyro
Deplorable is jumping to conclusions in my opinion, but it is still something we as a community should face as a possibility. Maybe not that likely, but a possibility nonetheless. And we need to prepare ourselves for that possibility instead of just ignoring it and burying it.
accusation that I'm just biased, which isn't something Pyro said, but rather implied. It's something that I've seen a lot of people say that means nothing to me. I was a fan of Pyrocynical, saw these accusations, and I went into them believing that Ivory had completely lied. I came out on the other side with the opinion that apart from minor exaggerations, he was telling the truth, and that the commentary community had fucked up. My original issue with
You are somewhat biased in my opinion, jumping to conclusions and always assuming the worst of Pyro, but isn't too biased that we can't take you seriously. A lot of your points are valid, yet some of your terrible takes you had on this situation, it has caused I and many others to take what you say with a grain of salt. It is clear to me you are passionate about this situation. Your heart is in the right place. That is good for something.
all of this was that the word grooming was being used as a scapegoat for all of the accusations being completely false, and Pyro doing nothing wrong. And in the end, what has happened again? While Pyro admits some wrongdoing in his video, his fans claim that his response was never bad in the first place. They don't criticize him for what he admits to doing, instead proclaiming him innocent in my comment section. Right back to where we started. Ivory is harassed and called a clout chaser and a liar, and now I'm also called a clout chaser and a liar. While none of these people have justification to do so, other than that Pyro gave a response. Whether it was good or not wasn't going to really matter to these people. I've said that
It disgusts me that even though Pyro told his fans not to harass Ivory because it probably caused him a lot of problems, which caused Pyro to apologize in his response, his fans still go out and harass him, call him a liar and a clout chaser. That is the worst part of this drama, Ivory being so abused throughout all of this. He is the one guy I can root for 100% throughout all of this. More than anything, he needs your support.
again simply because he responded at all. The community at large is made up of spineless fools who will constantly flip-flop on issues rather than actually having a solid opinion. One minute he's completely innocent, one minute he's framed by the public. It's just pathetic. People claim that Pyro disproved everything and that my videos are now null, and that everything is paper thin.
Community. It is outrageous that the screenshot had to exist and someone made those two videos. It is an accurate summarization of people's reaction to this, siding with whoever is winning at the time or that everyone else is siding with, instead of having one true opinion. In conclusion, hear both sides out, critique them both, admit that someone you like could do terrible things, and it's a possibility. This drama will never have me looking at similar ones again. Overall, I'm slightly leaning to Tom's sides, probably because I'm so angry at everyone else for not giving both sides a fair shake. This drama may be a killing blow to Turkey Tom and his credibility in the eyes of many, but it is asserted to me that Tom is the definitive anti-hero. Stop being biased stands for Pyrocynical, and don't die of radiation poisoning, I guess.
Go around the autumn sky, and often we would fly above, arms out on the freezing sun. Our jackets held us warm as dancing with the form. Walls, take each other's hand.